The city of Drumak was burning when the war began, but no alarms were sounded and no fighters rose to the sky. The war was not fought with weapons or bombs, but with silence, cruelty, and rules written long ago that no one dared question. In the shadows of the trade port's lower decks, a small group of alien servants knelt in chains, their eyes empty and their bodies weak from years of work and hunger. Among them was a young blue-skinned girl with white hair and no teeth. Her name, unknown to most and unimportant to all but one. She didn't speak often, and when she did, her words were broken and soft, shaped by years of being ignored. Humans passed by her every day, nobles with fine coats and gold rings, merchants with loud voices and louder footsteps. They never looked down, never noticed the way her hands trembled when she cleaned the mud from their boots or how she flinched when shouted at. In her mind, the world was made of cold stones, hard chains, and a sun that never rose in her sky. She ate scraps thrown outside the station canteen and slept beside leaking pipes, dreaming, not of freedom, but of warmth that didn't hurt. She didn't even remember what kindness felt like. Then he came, an old human with silver hair, walking with a polished cane and dressed in a coat of red and black velvet. His name was Lord Hemwick, a man known for old manners, older money, and strange ideas about worth and dignity. Most thought he was mad, some thought he was dangerous, but none dared question him to his face. He walked past the market that day and stopped. He saw the girl kneeling by a rusted cage, holding a broken bowl like it was a crown. His eyes narrowed, not with disgust, but with something sharper recognition. He didn't see a slave, or a beast, or trash like others did. He saw someone who had survived something cruel without letting it break her completely. So he asked for her price. The slaver laughed and said she wasn't worth even a half credit, because she had no teeth and couldn't speak clearly. But Lord Hemwick reached into his coat, pulled out a pouch, and dropped more than enough to buy a royal servant. Everyone stared, the slaver gawked, and the girl didn't move, frozen as if afraid to hope. He bent down and held out his hand, not as a master, but as someone offering choice. She stared at his hand like it was a trap, because in her world, nothing good ever came without pain. But he didn't pull away, so she placed her trembling blue fingers in his palm, and something changed in the air. It wasn't loud, but it was felt like thunder before a storm. He helped her up, dusted off her dress, and led her through the crowd as people whispered. The war began that moment, not between planets, but between old hate and a single act of human defiance. They called him a fool, said he would regret it, warned him she was nothing but a burden. But Lord Hemwick said nothing and walked on with his head high, while the girl followed, limping but upright for the first time in years. Her chains were gone, not just the iron ones, but the invisible ones built from shame, hunger, and silence. And as they disappeared into the upper deck's warm light, the girl's name returned to her lips for the first time since childhood. It was a small sound, but it echoed through the metal halls like a trumpet calling armies to rise. Her name was Veza, asterisk. The mansion of Lord Hemwick was quiet, filled with old books, warm lamps, and polished wood that smelled of time and care. Veza walked through the halls with small steps, her bare feet afraid to leave marks on the shining floors. No one shouted at her here. No one kicked her for walking too slow or speaking too softly. It felt like a dream, but one she didn't trust yet. The first room she entered had mirrors. She had never seen herself clearly before. Only dirty water or metal reflections in dark corners. Now she stood in front of a tall mirror, staring at a girl with thin arms, big eyes, and a mouth with missing teeth. She looked like a ghost from a place people forgot. Lord Hemwick stood behind her, saying nothing, just watching her see herself for the first time. "You are not a beast," he said gently. "You are a guest in my house." She turned toward him, unsure of what those words meant, unsure if she was even allowed to believe them, but she nodded, the tiniest sign of trust. and followed him deeper into the mansion. He gave her a small room near the garden, filled with sunlight and soft blankets. She touched the pillows like they were treasure, then held one close like a shield. The bed didn't hurt her back, and the walls didn't echo with screams. For the first night in years, she slept without fear. In the morning, a servant knocked on her door and offered her a plate of warm food. Bread, fruit, a cup of broth, and something sweet that melted on her tongue. She cried without knowing why, her body not used to kindness that asked for nothing in return. No one watched her like a beast. No one demanded she eat outside. She sat by a window and ate with her hands shaking from the weight of peace. Lord Hemwick came to see her every evening. He never asked questions about her past or made her retell her pain. Instead, he read books aloud or played quiet music on an old stringed instrument. He spoke to her as if she were whole, even when she felt broken inside. He treated her like someone who mattered. One day, he took her into the city. She wore a clean dress and walked beside him, not behind. People stared, some laughed, some whispered cruel things about her heritage and her place. But Lord Hemwick didn't slow down or change his path. He walked proudly, and with every step, Vesa felt less invisible. They passed by the same market where she had once knelt in chains. The same slaver saw her and frowned. But this time she didn't look away. She met his eyes, lifted her chin, and stood tall beside the man who freed her. There was no fear in her face, only quiet strength and something deeper dignity. A child pointed at her and asked his mother why a dirty alien walked with a noble. The mother pulled him away quickly, but Lord Hemwick stopped and turned to the crowd. "She is not dirty," he said calmly, his voice carrying like thunder. "She is free and under my protection." No one replied. No one dared. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. That night, Vesa sat by the fire and tried to smile with the few teeth she had left. Lord Hemwick saw her and smiled back, not out of pity, but respect. "You don't have to smile if it hurts," he said. "But know this, Vesa. You are no longer anyone's servant." She didn't speak, but she moved closer, resting her hand on the armrest of his chair. The gesture was simple, but it said everything. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel small. The days passed slowly in the mansion, but they were gentle. Vesa began to explore the rooms on her own, learning how to live in a place that did not expect her to bleed to earn her place. She learned how to open curtains, how to fold blankets, how to breathe without fear of being struck for existing. The old house held many secrets, but none of them scared her anymore. Lord Hemwick taught her how to write her name. Her fingers shook as she held the pen, and her first letters were uneven, but he praised each one like it was gold. She stared at her name written in ink, as if seeing proof she was real for the first time. Vesa was not just a body anymore, she was a person. One afternoon, he took her to his library. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, and the smell of paper filled her chest with wonder. He handed her a thin book with pictures and simple words, and sat with her as she sounded each one out. When she got something wrong, he never raised his voice, only guided her again with patience. In the garden, the flowers began to bloom, and with them, so did Vesa. Her steps grew firmer, her voice no longer whispered. She spoke when she wanted to, laughed when something was funny, and even asked questions. The staff no longer looked at her with confusion, but with quiet respect. But the outside world still watched with judgment. One evening, guests arrived for a noble gathering at the estate. Men and women in fine clothing stepped out of golden transports and entered the hall with sharp eyes and sharper tongues. Lord Hemwick asked Vesa to help serve the tea. She carried the tray carefully, her eyes lowered out of habit. But the moment she entered the room, whispers began. "She's one of them." A woman sneered behind her fan. "He lets her walk inside his house." A man chuckled and asked if she knew which fork to use. Vesa stood still, her chest tight, the tray trembling in her hands. But Lord Hemwick rose to his feet and spoke firmly. "She is not here to entertain your cruelty," he said. "She is part of this house, and she will be treated with respect." His words left the room silent, every pair of eyes suddenly unsure. Vesa placed the tray on the table and looked up. "I know which fork to use," she said quietly. "And I know I'm not dirt." Her voice did not shake, and her words were clean and sharp. The guests said nothing more, and she walked back into the kitchen with her head high. Later that night, Hemwick found her sitting in the courtyard under the moonlight. She was holding a piece of bread and smiling at the stars. "You were brave tonight," he said as he sat beside her. She nodded and replied, "You made me believe I could be." From that night on, she no longer asked permission before entering rooms. She no longer flinched when someone touched her shoulder. She had learned that dignity was not something given, it was something protected. And Lord Hemwick had given her the space to protect her own. One morning, she went to the market alone. People stared, but she didn't hide her face. She bought fruit and bread with coins he had given her and carried them in a cloth bag with steady hands. When she returned, Hemwick smiled and said, "You went as Vesa, not as a servant." She looked around at the home that was once strange and frightening. Now it was filled with her footprints, her voice, her stories, and her growth. She no longer felt like a shadow hiding in corners. She had become part of the light. Vesa stood at the tall window, watching the estate's workers prepare the fields for planting season. She could hear their laughter and the rhythm of their tools in the soil, and it made her chest feel warm. She remembered when she used to wake up on cold stone floors, afraid of sunlight because it meant work without rest. Now she woke up to birds, soft blankets, and a home that welcomed her steps. Lord Hemwick was old, and his joints had grown stiff. Still, he insisted on walking the grounds with Vesa every morning. She would hold his arm as he moved carefully through the garden paths, stopping now and then to smell flowers or talk about the stars. She listened to his stories with quiet respect, and sometimes she told her own. One morning, he handed her a sealed letter and said, "You must learn what freedom truly means." Inside the envelope was a legal document, transferring ownership of a cottage on the edge of the estate. The paper shook in her hands as she read her own name at the top. She looked at him with wide eyes, and he simply nodded. "You don't belong in chains or in someone's service," he said softly. "You belong to yourself, Vesa, and this is only the beginning." She could barely speak, but her eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "Thank you." He placed a hand gently on her shoulder and smiled. That evening, she sat alone in the empty cottage. It smelled of fresh wood and new beginnings. There was only one chair, a table, and a small bed, but it was hers. For the first time she belonged to a place, not as a servant, but as its soul. The next day, villagers from nearby settlements passed by the estate gates. Some nodded in respect, others looked away, unsure of her place now that she stood beside the master of the estate. But Vesa didn't lower her head anymore. She stood tall, wearing clean clothes and the pride of someone who had earned her life. Soon, other aliens came seeking work, freedom, or simply safety. Lord Hemwick offered them simple jobs and fair pay. Vesa spoke to them, helped them understand the land, and taught them how to trust again. Her past pain became a bridge for their hope. One of the newcomers, a young girl with scars on her arms, asked, "Why do you help us?" Vesa looked into her eyes and answered, "Because someone helped me first." She told her how she was once voiceless, broken, and cast aside. Now she had the chance to become someone else's beginning. In the evenings, the once silent cottage became alive with the sound of laughter and stories. She hosted meals with the new workers, offering bread, soup, and kindness. They listened to her like she was a leader, not because she demanded it, but because she had lived what they were still escaping. She was proof that survival could turn into purpose. Lord Hemwick watched all this quietly from the porch of his manor. He rarely spoke during those visits, just sat and watched her bring light into other people's eyes. One night, he said, "You've done more for them than I ever could." Vesa replied, "You gave me the start, I only passed it forward." The estate changed slowly, but deeply, no longer just a symbol of power. It became a place of healing and rebuilding. Vesa helped design a school for the children of former slaves. She wanted them to grow up knowing letters before they knew pain. As she stood beside the stone foundation of the school one morning, she looked back toward the manor. She remembered every corner of that house, every step that brought her closer to herself. She did not forget the cold chains, but she also remembered the hand that broke them, and now, she had hands strong enough to lift others too. The school's first day was brighter than Vesa expected. Children of different species sat on floor mats with curious eyes and restless hands. She stood at the front of the room, holding a thin book with trembling fingers. She had learned these words herself not long ago, and now, she would pass them on. Her voice was soft but sure as she read the first line. The children leaned closer, drawn by her rhythm and warmth. They did not care that she had once been a servant or that her teeth still hadn't fully regrown. To them, she was knowledge, comfort, and someone who believed they were worth teaching. Lord Hemwick entered quietly and stood in the doorway. He watched her from a distance, nodding slowly as if the scene was something he had always dreamed of. He turned to leave without a word, letting her have the moment for herself. Vesa noticed his absence only after the children left for lunch. That afternoon, Vesa walked up to the manor with a basket of food. Inside, she found him sitting by the fire, a warm blanket across his knees. His breathing was slow, but he opened his eyes when she entered. "You've made something beautiful," he whispered. She sat beside him and took his hand, just as he once did for her. "You made it possible," she answered, her voice low. "I only lit the torch," he replied, "but you carried it through the dark." They sat in silence as the fire crackled beside them. The next morning, Lord Hemwick didn't come down for breakfast. The servants found him in his sleep, peaceful and still. Vesa closed his eyes and placed a soft kiss on his hand. Then she stood and walked out of the room with dry eyes and steady steps. The funeral was held under the silver-leaf trees he loved. People from across the region came to honor him. Former servants, freed workers, local farmers, and even council members stood shoulder to shoulder. And at the front stood Vesa, dressed in gray, her head held high. When she spoke, her voice carried across the crowd. He saw value in what others discarded. She said, "He didn't change the world with power, but with kindness and trust." And then she said goodbye not as a servant, but as his equal. After his passing, the estate was left to her in full. No one protested, for they had all seen what she had become. She kept everything running, not through orders but by walking among her people and listening. She turned fields into food, rooms into homes, and work into purpose. The council sent an envoy, offering to buy parts of the land. Vesa refused kindly, saying, "This land belongs to those who need hope." They left with a confused look but said nothing more. Whispers of her leadership spread across sectors. Many came seeking shelter: old slaves, wounded veterans, abandoned children. Vesa made room for all of them. She created a system where everyone worked, but no one feared. A place where you could earn food without selling dignity. Her teeth slowly regrew, but she kept one missing intentionally. It reminded her where she started and who she was before hope entered her life. People began calling her Mistress Vesa, but she always answered, "I'm just Vesa." Titles didn't matter to her, freedom did. Years later, a girl ran barefoot across the field, clutching a small book. She reached Vesa and asked, "Is this how your story started?" Vesa smiled, knelt down, and replied, "No, this is how yours begins." And with that, the cycle of freedom continued. The estate no longer looked like a place of nobility, but of community. The gardens were wild with joy, the halls echoed with new voices, and every door remained open. There were no chains in sight, not on hands, and not on hearts, and at its center stood Vesa, a servant no more, but a mother to many.